and we could just say greater than. That's an easier way. I could also go ahead and create a new rule, but then I can use one of this option. I can say greater than, and let's give some value. Might be we would be interested in looking at any value greater than 12,000. So let's choose 12,000. And here it says what color would you want to select. So for example, I would say something like yellow filled with dark yellow text. And let's say, okay. So right now what I'm doing is I have all the values where the revenue generated was greater than 10,000, but then I have also selected all the sales people who have made or who have generated revenue greater than 12,000. So I can just do a Control Z to see the previous result. Now here I had the values which were greater than 10,000, and the one which we did just now basically highlighted the values which are greater than 12,000. So this is one simple example. Now we can look at some other examples. Say for example, you want to format cells using 3-color scale. So if you look at the values here, I have a 3-color scale mainly in green, yellow, and red. And how do you do this? So for example, I can go in here and I can go to conditional formatting. So I would want to go for color scales, and here you can create different rules. So we can set up a 2-color scale. So we can say format only values that are above and below average. I can format only cells that contain something. I can get the top and bottom values. So these are different ways in which I can have a 3-color based scale. Now what I will do is I will select this, and let me show you the rule which I have. So for example, I can go into manage rules, and if you see here, there are certain rules which have been specified. Now what does that mean? So you would want to specify a 3-grade scale. So for example, if I would want to look at my first rule, it tells me that I'm choosing 3-color scale. I can choose lowest value, percentile, and highest value, and that basically will select the cells based on their values. So what we could have done is I can basically use one of these values. I can delete these rules which I have created. So for example, I have all these rules, but you should always carefully remember that the rules will be applied in the order shown. So for example, if I just delete these rules and then say apply and say okay, my data is back. Now it does not have any highlighting. Now I can go in here. I can say conditional formatting. I could go for color scales, or I could basically go into new rule. So I would want the cells to be using 3-color scale. So let's choose 3-color scale. Now when you say 3-color scale, it says what will be the color of lowest value, and we could choose, might be any one of this. Let's choose red. I can say midpoint is percentile 50, and then the highest value is green, and if that looks good, let's say okay. And now if you see, the lowest values have been highlighted as red. You have mid values, and then you have the positive value. So this is a 3-color scale, and that easily helps me in identifying the data based on the cell values. Now in conditional formatting, what you can also do is you can basically color the cells based on their values. So what we are seeing here is if the revenue generated is greater than average, then that shows in green. And if the revenue generated is lesser than average, that shows in orange. Now, how do we do that? So we can basically again manage some rules. So I can basically create a new rule. Now here I can select one of the options which says format only values that are above or below average, and that's the option I would want to select. Now I can select this, and it says format values that are above average. So in our case, we had it in green. So for example, I'll say above average, and then here I can go for a particular color. So you can go for a particular size. So let's go and look into the formatting. So for example, let's choose yellow. Say okay. Now I'm saying wherever the cell values are above average, it would be yellow instead of green. And let's go in here. Let's go and look into manage rules. So this is basically the rule which we are applying. Now we can also add a new rule, and I need to select the values. So for example, I will say here, so we had gone for above, now we'll go for below, we'll go for format, we will choose red, we'll say okay, we'll say now these are basically the rules which we have created, and here it says applies to your data. So right now it has not been applied. So for example, if I select this and then I could basically choose my area, just hit on enter, and similarly you can go in here and then select your area, hit on enter and say apply, say okay. And now if you see, I have really chosen bright colors, but then I have said wherever my revenue generated is above average, it should be in yellow, and below average should be in red. So we wanted above average to be in green and below average to be in orange. So that's what we have here, right? So you can always color code your cell values based on some rules which you are setting up. Now, similarly, you can also find the top 10 and bottom 10 values, and that's pretty easy. So you can just select this, and then you can go into conditional formatting. You can go for top and bottom values, top 10 items, bottom 10 items, or you can go in for more rules. So you can say format only top or bottom ranked values. So you have top 10. Now you can choose the color, and for example, I'll go for blue and I'll say okay. So now if you see, my top 10 values are blue. Now similarly, I can add one more rule. So I can say new rule, and I can say let's go for top or bottom. Let's go for bottom. Let's go for format. Let's say orange. Say okay, and that's it. So now you have your values which are top or bottom 10 values. So you are using conditional formatting where you are basically highlighting your cell values based on different colors, and here easy conditional formatting based on different rules helps us to do that. Now similarly, you can also have the values which is basically showing you how the values are increasing. So what we can do is we can select our columns. Either you could apply this to all the columns. Now here I have applied this only to Jan and April. Now I could apply this for June. So let's say June. So you can go for gradient fill. You can go for solid fill. You can obviously just select the color, and that takes care of the things. You can say, for example, select this, and now this is selected. What I would want to might be format this. So I can go in here. I can go into manage rules. Now that will tell me what rule has been applied in the order. So I can just do a edit rule, and that basically says this is a solid fill, which is color. You have no border. This is basically color is black. Now I can go for something like gradient fill, and I can say okay. And now if I say apply and okay, so this basically is like your first column. So you can use conditional formatting for various use cases, and you can highlight the values So anyone who would look at the value would automatically notice which are the higher values, which are lower values. Might be here the revenue is getting generated or was getting generated but did not grow beyond a particular value, and so on. Now similarly, you can also go in for different options. Say for example, here we would want to see if the revenue was dropping, or if the revenue decreased, or say for example if the revenue was going up for this particular salesperson. So here we are looking at Carol. So in Jan the revenue generation by sales was very high, then in Feb it was falling down, in March it was kind of stable, then in April it went way below. So we can obviously work on this, wherein we can grade our cell values. So what we can do is we can go in for highlighting the cell values. Now you can go for color scales, you can go for icon sets, and this is where you can choose your different shapes. So you could choose one of these shapes. So for example, I would be interested in looking at the indicators like directional. I could go using this 3 arrows. I can go in for this color. I can choose directional, and then my values are automatically using directional. Now what we can also do is we can then go into manage rules, and that basically tells me what rules have been applied. So for example, the latest one is the icon set, which I have chosen. It shows the selected columns. I can obviously do an edit rule, and then I can choose. So I'm saying the format style is icon sets. I'm not using a data bar. I'm not using color scale. Now here I have chosen the style of icons, and then here you can basically give some values. So you have icon which is green when the value is greater than or equal to 67%. When I say hyphen or minus, it is less than 67. It's way below 33%, then you give this value. So you can obviously edit and easily highlight your cell values based on this icon set. So I can apply this, and that's how I use conditional formatting. So conditional formatting can be very useful if you would want to use icon set, if you want to use your data bars, if you would want to highlight particular values, if you would want to color code based on some calculation, if you would want to use a 3-color or a 2-color scale, or if you would want to just find out values based on some simple calculation. So conditional formatting is used extensively by data analysts or people who are working business intelligence teams, or people who would want to use Excel to easily identify the data, easily identify the cells which contain particular value, or finding out less significant or more significant cells to then pull out values and carry out your computations, calculations, or analysis. Let's learn one more feature of Excel, and that's basically your data validation. Now, this can be very useful when you would want to work on validating the data which is being fed in the cells. So you could limit it to basically a number between a particular value. You could also add some messages to it if you would want, or you could even circle invalid data or clear validation circles. So data validation really helps us in validating the data which is being fed in to particular fields. Now, it's a feature in Excel which is mainly used to control what a user can fill in a cell. You can decide what type of values must be entered. You can also restrict user to enter only valid data, and if any invalid data is entered, an error message will be displayed. Now that's where you can use your data validations. So let's see how that can be done. So for data validation, let's see some exercises here. So for example, you have a name column and you would want to restrict that the name should accept only 15 characters. Now, how do you do that? So you can basically select the cells, or you can just select a particular cell and then we can later drag the property to other fields. Now here, once the cell is selected, so for example, let's try this out and let's see if that works. So for example, I will say Peter Johnson, okay, and that is basically 5 and 9 and 12 characters. So let's say junior, and if I do this, it says input length is greater than 15. Do you want to continue? If I say yes, right? So basically, it is allowing me to add the value here, but then it has basically violated the rule. Now, this is giving a message to the user that the username should be entered less than 15 characters. Now, how do we do that? So for this, we can basically select the column and then we can search for data tab and get into data validation. So this is where you can create or select different kind of rules. So for example, I can go into data validation, I can go into settings and I can say the text length and that should be less than 15. Now this is the maximum I'm giving and it says apply these changes to all other cells within the same settings. So I can do this or I can just drag and drop. So I can basically apply this formula and now you can in fact randomly check in any particular cell is the rule applied. So it says text length less than 15. So we can basically control data validation in this particular column and that will allow only 15 characters. It will pop up a message if the user really wants to go beyond the particular limit. Now you also have similarly date of birth. So the restriction is date of birth should be between 10 Jan 1990 to 30 December 1998. So this is what we want to restrict. How do we do that? So we can select the field, we can click on data validation, and if you see here, I have selected date and then date is between, and then obviously you can give a range that is 10 Jan date 1990, 12/30, 1998. So that's the start and the end filter which has been applied. And once this is done, you can also check your input messages which says when cell is selected, show this input message, enter a valid date. So if you see here on the left, there is a pop-up which is coming up which says enter a valid date. Now I can also say when user enters invalid data, show this error alert. So I can say stop, I can say invalid entered, and this is how I have set a rule. So for example, if I just do something like this, and that says invalid date entered, I can do a retry. It will take me back here, but unless and until I do not give the right format, the date will not be accepted. And again, the same thing applies to all the cells. Similarly, email. So we are saying the email should have @ present in the value provided. Now for this, we can use a formula and we can select, well, I would want to apply this rule to all these rows starting from C2 to C14. So let's get into data validation. Let's look in settings. And here we are choosing custom. Now within custom, I'm choosing what is the formula. So I'm saying is number. And then I'm saying find @ for the rows C2 to C14. So the only thing we are concerned about here is the value should have an email icon. You can input a particular message. You can say what has to be done for error alert. So for example, we can basically go in here and we can say invalid email. That's the title I'm giving. And we can say email should contain @ So if I do this and if I say OK, now you can test it. So you can say A, B, C, D, and that says email should contain @ and basically that will not allow me to add the values. So now you have the field called salary. It says salary should be greater than 50,000. Now we can limit the values by choosing a whole number. So for example, for salary, I can go into data validation. I can go into settings. So here I can say something like decimal, or I can go for whole number. So both of the things are fine. It depends on what kind of values get into this particular field. So if I say whole number and if I say it has to be greater than 50,000, so I'm saying the minimum is 50,000. Or I could have given a decimal and then I can say greater than, less than, equal, or anything, or even between. So I can select greater than and then I can just say OK. Now for rank, the rule is rank should be between 100 and 200. So again, we can use a whole number. So ranks will generally not be decimal. So this would be whole number. Salary can be a whole number or it could be decimals. So we have chosen decimal here, and in rank, if you click on data validation, I have chosen whole number. I've set data between 100 and 200. Input message, nothing. Error alert, nothing, but that depends. I can give this. So this is how you can just do a simple data validation and control the values which land in the cell. Okay, so now let's also understand how we can restrict the values in a particular cell which might be based on a list of items. Now, for example, here, if you see, I have two columns. So one column basically has the values of city names, and then you have places within that particular city. So if I would want to implement a data validation based on this, so for example, if you see here city, and that basically shows me only the 4 values which can be entered. And if I go to place, then it tells me for Maharashtra, I can only enter Pune, Mumbai, Nasik. Now, how do I do this? So say, for example, you take an empty field and you want to restrict the values of city names. So I could select data validation. I could basically select list, and then it tells me you need to enter the list values, that is the source. So you click here, and then I can just select these fields. Now, if I do this, and if I say OK, it has implemented a data validation, but if you look into this, it will show me the same thing, but then it shows me some empty cells which did not have any value. So this is fine, but it would be better if we do it in a different way. So I can select this, and I've already given my city names here. So I can just do a data validation, and here in the source, let me get rid of this. Now I can just have my cursor here. I can select these values, and then if I say OK, so now if you see, my city names have been restricted to these values. And that's how you can implement your data validation. So I have this data validation here, but I will get rid of this one by just doing a Control-Z. Now I'll come here and say, for example, I would want to implement the same data validation. Now the easiest way would be in doing this for all my 4 cities. Now if you see here, I have data validation. I could choose Bangalore. And if you come and check here, there is no data validation, but we have implemented data validation here. Now, how is that done? So I could select this, or for example, I can go in here. I can select data validation. I can select list. And then here in the source, I will say for Bangalore, the values should be these. And then if I basically say OK, now if we see, these are the values which are fed into Bangalore. So we could do this, or like what we have done here. So if you can check the data validation rule, I have used list and then I have said indirect F2. So basically, I'm giving in a formula which relates to the value which is in for the city Maharashtra. So we could do this, or in a simpler way, we could do this and then just drag and drop here. So we could check for Maharashtra, what are the values? Let's choose a different city. So for example, Kolkata, and here I will choose. Now, since we did a drag and drop, it has basically taken the values of Bangalore. So that's not right. So we select this, we go into data validation, and here I can either feed in the values, that is such as Bangalore. I could basically say something like this, Kolkata, and I could say okay. So now if you see, it shows me the places in Kolkata. Now here we have, let's choose a different city. So for example, let's go for Delhi. And here I can go to data validation and I can just say Delhi. So this is an easier way of doing it. Or if you remember the formula, then what you can do is you can just give in indirect and then basically give the value of the cell for which you would want to keep in the values. So this is how you can do list validation. So you can provide a list of values and then you can restrict the values in a cell which should be belonging to a particular list. So this is how you do a simple data validation by restricting the data in the form of a list.